In 2021, we saw the 107-win Giants fend off the 106-win Dodgers to win the NL West. I didn't think we were going to see a division race that great for a long time. And then we had the race for the 2022 NL East crown. The Braves and the Mets took us on an epic ride that came down to the second to last game of the season. And today, let's run down exactly how this happened. To understand the 2022 race, we have to look back at what happened in 2021. The NL East was very weak. The Mets had a steady lead all summer, playing about 6 to 9 games over 500. The Braves were underperforming all season, and they were still under 500 going into August. But in mid-August, both teams did a 180. The Braves entered August 5 games back, and by August 27th, they had picked up 10 games in the standings. On August 13th, both teams had 60 wins. The Braves would end up with 88. The Mets would end with just 77. The Braves' turnaround was credited to revamping their whole outfield at the deadline. Having lost Acuna for the year, they brought in Joc Pederson, Jorge Soler, Adam Duvall, and Eddie Rosario. These guys were instrumental in getting the Braves to the playoffs, and they all had amazing moments in the playoffs. Alex Anthopoulos was praised for these moves that led to a World Series title, and the Mets decided they would do the same thing over the offseason. They added 2 Oakland outfielders in free agency, Starling Marte and Mark Canha. They also harvested Oakland for Chris Bassitt, picked up Eduardo Escobar for the infield, and then gave Max Scherzer a ridiculous contract that caught everyone's attention. At age 37, he was still one of the elite starters in the league, but that contract worth $43 million a year was out of this world. He would join Jacob deGrom, who was having one of the best seasons in Major League history before getting hurt right before the All-Star break. The Mets were making a statement. They would outgun the Braves this year, and this time, it would be them hoisting the World Series trophy. As for the champs, they didn't have the same kind of overhaul, but they did stun everyone by failing to re-sign the face of their franchise, Freddie Freeman. He walked in free agency, but they were able to swing a trade with the A's to get Matt Olson. By some metrics, this was an upgrade at first base, especially when you look at the long term. They also got some key guys back, Marcell Ozuna and Ronald Acuna, and they also hope to bolster that bullpen by signing Kenley Jansen. Right out of the gate, this all looked very familiar. The first 2 months of the season seemed to be following the same track. By May 31st, the 2021 Mets were in first place in 7 games over 500. This year, they were even better, 17 games over 500. Their pitching was good, 5th place in the league at this point. Max Scherzer ended April with a 1.80 ERA and ended May with a 2.54 ERA. Chris Bassitt only gave up 1 run over his first 12 innings, ending May with a 3.66 ERA. Edwin Diaz already had 11 saves up to this point. This was all done without Jacob deGrom. He looked like he was coming back healthy in spring training, but because of an issue with his shoulder blade, he landed back on the injured list. Through May, it was their hitting that was driving their success, 2nd in the league in runs scored. They ended the month by posting 23 runs over their last 2 games against Washington. The only team in baseball with a better record was the Yankees. The Braves were floundering once again. In 2021, they ended May 1 game under 500. This year, they were 4 games under 500. While the Mets were posting a 10-0 win over the Nationals, the Braves were blowing a late lead in Arizona and losing in walk-off fashion. The starter of that game was Charlie Morton, arguably their best pitcher from 2021, but he was getting rocked in 2022. He ended April with a 7 ERA, bringing it down to 5.47 by the end of May. Helping to pick up the slack was Kyle Wright, missing most of the 2021 season but coming back strong, ending May with a 2.68 ERA. This team was just mediocre all around, 9th in the league in offense and 8th in pitching. This was even despite getting Ronald Acuna back in the lineup on April 28th, and through the end of May, he had an excellent 826 OPS. These teams met for one series over the first 2 months, a 4-game series in Queens, and they split. Still, the Braves fell behind 10.5 games, and with the season about a third over, it looked like there was no way they would catch the juggernaut Mets. There were 2 important developments at the tail end of May. First, Michael Harris made his Major League debut on May 28th. He only had 2 hits in his first 13 at-bats to round out the month, but the eventual Rookie of the Year would be a spark plug this offense needed. On the mound, Spencer Strider made his first start of his career on May 30th. He appeared in 11 games up to this point, posting a 2.22 ERA, and despite giving up 5 runs over 4 1/3 in that game in Arizona, the eventual Rookie of the Year runner-up would be a vital piece in that rotation. While the Braves were loading up from their farm system, the Mets were still waiting for good news from Jacob deGrom, especially because Max Scherzer went on the IL after a start on May 18th, suffering an oblique strain, and he would be out the rest of May and all of June. The Mets showed they were vulnerable, being outscored in the month of June by 15 runs, but they managed to finish the month over 500 at 13-12. Once the calendar turned to June, the Braves flipped the switch. We saw them do this in 2021, but it took them until August to do so. This year, June 1st is when it all turned around. Their schedule softened up a lot to start the month. They started by shutting out the Diamondbacks behind Kyle Wright, avoiding the sweep, then sweeping the Rockies, the A's, the Pirates, and the Nationals. These teams ended the season a combined 158 games under 500, and the Braves took full advantage. They started this 14-game winning streak 10.5 games out of first, and they ended it only 4 games back. But during that last series against Washington, Ozzie Albies fractured his foot after getting jammed and he was out for 2 months. Orlando Arcia would take over for him, and he rewarded the team right away by homering in his first 2 starts, including getting 4 hits in the last game of the winning streak. Going into July, the Mets' lead was down to 3 games, but Max Scherzer came back on July 5th and he was better than ever. 6 innings, 2 hits, no runs, 11 strikeouts, but the 3rd worst pitching staff in the league. The Reds shut down the offense and the Mets would lose in walk-off fashion. On July 10th, the Mets would face a whole new monster but have the same result. Cy Young winner Sandy Alcantara shut them out over 7 innings, but the Mets' Taijuan Walker matched him pitch for pitch. Walker was coming off an all-star season that fell apart at the end of 2021, but he came back strong and had a 2.55 ERA by the all-star break. The Mets couldn't get anything going on offense, and they would get shut out and lose in extras. This game would drop their lead to a game and a half going into a huge series in Atlanta. In Game 1, it was ace versus ace, Scherzer outdueling Fried for the win. Spencer Strider and the bullpen were awesome in Game 2, and their new first baseman, Matt Olson, got to David Peterson in the 6th. The Braves took that one. In the rubber match, Charlie Morton continued to struggle, giving up 5 runs in 5 innings, and Chris Bassett only gave up 1 over 6. This was a huge series win in Atlanta, pushing the Mets' lead to 2.5 games and carrying that into the All-Star break, making a statement that they would not collapse like they did in 2021, and they were ready for a dogfight to win this division. The Mets standing at 58-35, the Braves standing at 56-38. Coming out of the break, the Mets had a 3-game losing streak, but then ran off 7 in a row, including 2 over the Yankees. They made one of the first moves at the trade deadline, getting Daniel Vogelbach from the Pirates, and over his first 6 games, he hit .375 with a 1046 OPS. The Mets would also make a move for Darren Ruff from the Giants, but he was a total non-factor for the team, ending his Mets season with a 152 average and .413 OPS. The Mets' biggest pickup at the trade deadline was Jacob deGrom. On August 2nd, he was finally able to make his season debut, being off the field for more than a calendar year, and he gave up just 1 run over 5 innings in Washington. But the bullpen let him down, the bats never showed up, and the Mets lost 5-1. The Braves made some changes also. A year after they struck gold at the deadline, they got Robbie Grossman from the Tigers, but he really was not an impact bat. They traded Will Smith to the Astros for Jake Odorizzi, and his .524 ERA was not what they were looking for. But they also got Raisel Iglesias from the Angels, and he was incredible. He was their main setup man, pitching in 28 games and giving up 1 earned run, a 0.34 ERA. With both teams reloaded and going into August, they would face off for a very rare 5-game series in Queens, entering the series 4.5 games apart. In the first game, the Mets offense jumped all over Kyle Wright, and the bullpen hung on for the win. The Braves would take Game 2, pinning 8 runs on Taijuan Walker over 1+ innings, and it was over before it even started. David Peterson shut out the Braves over 5 1/3 innings, and the offense was all over Jake Odorizzi in the bullpen, stringing together 13 hits and winning 8-5. With a 2-1 series lead, the Mets had Scherzer and deGrom lined up for the knockout blow, and they delivered. Scherzer outdueled Max Fried, giving up nothing over 7 innings, while Fried gave up 2 over 6. And then deGrom had his way with the Braves over 5 2/3 innings before Dansby Swanson took him yard. But at this point, the offense already scored 5 runs off Spencer Strider, and Edwin Diaz struck out the side to take 4 out of 5. The division lead stretched to 6.5 games, going up to 7 after sweeping the Reds. It may have seemed over at that point, but the Braves got hot. They left that series in New York angry, going to Boston and getting the sweep, then swept the Marlins, and 8 days after the last loss, they welcomed the Mets into Truist Park and beat the snot out of them. Carlos Carrasco only lasted 2 innings, leaving with an oblique injury that would sit him down for 2 weeks, and the bullpen didn't do any better. They blew it open with an 8-run 6 and took it 13-1. The Mets bats were silent again in Game 2, Charlie Morton having a great outing, giving up nothing over 6 2/3. Taijuan Walker had to leave after 2 innings with back spasms. The bullpen gave up 5 runs, and the Mets' lead was back down to 3.5 games. Scherzer tried to get his team back on track, but the wheels started coming off in the 7th. Lucky for the Mets, the offense came to play, and they took a high-scoring affair 9-7. The series finale was between Max Fried and Jacob deGrom, with Fried going 7 and giving up 2. DeGrom going 6 2/3 and coming out after giving up a 2-out single to Vaughn Grissom, giving the ball to Seth Lugo, and Michael Harris drove him in with a double. Kenley Jansen finished off the win, and the Braves took 3 out of 4. The Braves were hot coming in, and they would stay hot, immediately having to play the Astros and taking 2 out of 3, sweeping the Pirates, stumbling a bit against St. Louis, but getting back on track against the Rockies, Marlins, and A's. After that series against the Mets, and leading up to September 6th, they would win 12 out of 16, and after the Mets were blown out in Pittsburgh, and the Braves held on to a 10-9 win in Oakland, the two teams stood tied at the top of the East. The Braves had a rocky time out west, losing 4 out of 5 to the Mariners and the Giants, but the Mets could not take advantage. They got swept at home against the Cubs. Then, the Mets swept a 4-game series against the Pirates, and took the first 2 from Milwaukee, but picked up no ground on the Braves. They were busy sweeping the Phillies and taking the first 2 against Washington. Going into their games on September 28th, both teams were tied at 97 and 58. The Mets were at home against the Marlins, and found themselves down 4-0 in the 7th, being shut down by Jesus Luzardo. Then, Eduardo Escobar took over. He homered to get them on the board. Then, he drove in the 2 game-tying runs in the 8th. And, for good measure, he got the walk-off hit in the 10th. Meanwhile, the Braves were having no fun against Josiah Gray in Washington, but their bullpen kept them in the game, and Michael Harris tied the game in the 8th. The game went into extra innings, and where the Mets were walking off, the Braves were getting walked off. This broke the tie, leading into the ultimate showdown in Atlanta. Up 1 game and leading the season series 9-7, all the Mets had to do was avoid a sweep and they would be in good shape to win the East. Both teams had their pitching lined up for this series. Max Fried against Jacob deGrom for Game 1, and Fried was awesome, 1 run over 5 innings. deGrom threw 6 solid innings, but he gave up back-to-back homers to Austin Riley and Matt Olson, and then Dansby Swanson got him in the 6th. The Braves took Game 1, and the teams were tied once again. Now, Kyle Wright against Max Scherzer. The Mets had a 2-1 lead in the 5th, but Dansby Swanson flipped it over with a 2-run homer, and Matt Olson got some insurance off Scherzer, and the bullpen held on for the win. Now, the Braves were up by 1 game, and the season series was tied at 9, so the Mets could still control their destiny if they won on Sunday Night Baseball. It was Charlie Morton against Chris Bassett, and Dansby Swanson set the tone by hitting a home run in his 3rd straight game. The Mets got to Morton in the 3rd, took a 3-1 lead, but the Braves rallied off Bassett to grab a 4-3 lead. After Travis d'Arnaud hit the go-ahead 2-run single, Bassett got pulled, the stadium went dark, and he had to walk off in this atmosphere. Then, in the 6th, Matt Olson went yard for the 3rd game in a row, joining Dansby Swanson in that incredible feat, and the bullpen was great. Lee, Iglesias, Minter, Jansen, Jeff McNeil lined out to Acuna, completing the sweep and bringing their magic number down to 1. The frustrated Mets did their part in the last series, sweeping the Nationals with a combined score of 21-4, and the Braves dropped 2 out of 3 in Miami, but they won the game they needed to win. Kenley Jansen slamming the door on a 2-1 victory with his 41st save, and the 101-win Braves won the East over the 101-win Mets, winning the season series 10-9, the tightest possible division race. These teams may have combined for 202 wins in the regular season, but they only combined for 2 wins in the playoffs. I don't know if these teams just beat each other up so bad that they didn't have anything left for the playoffs, or if they just ran into hot teams in San Diego and Philly, but it was a disappointing end to an epic race, one that baseball fans won't forget anytime soon. Let me know if you have anything to add about the race for the NL East in 2022, or anything else that stood out to you last year. Before you go, don't forget to drop a like, and if you're new here and want to see more content like this, please give me a sub. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.